Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, and my boss decided to send me to this week-long conference in the city. The company booked me at this decent hotel. Nothing fancy, but clean and professional. I was looking forward to it since it meant a break from my usual routine of driving between clinics and hospitals all day. The first few days went smoothly. I'd wake up around 7, grab breakfast, and head to the conference center. Standard business stuff. The hotel had this older elevator system, kinda slow, but it worked fine. I'm staying on the 8th floor, so I use it multiple times a day. That's where I met her. It was Thursday morning, and I was running a few minutes late for the opening session. I pressed the elevator button and waited. When the doors finally opened, I was ready to step out when this woman just bulldozed right into me. I'm talking full speed ahead, no hesitation, like I was invisible. I had to literally jump backward to avoid getting trampled. She was probably 5 feet 8, blonde hair in a tight bun, wearing this expensive-looking business suit. She just pushed past me into the elevator like she owned the place. Behind her was this guy, maybe her husband or boyfriend, looking embarrassed. He at least had the decency to wait for me to get out before entering. The guy apologized quietly for her behavior. I told him it wasn't a problem, trying to be polite, but honestly, I was annoyed. Who does that? It's basic elevator etiquette. You let people exit before you enter. My grandmother taught me that when I was 5 years old. The woman didn't even acknowledge what happened. She was already jabbing at the buttons and checking her phone like nothing happened. The doors closed and I stood there for a second, shaking my head. I figured it was just a one-time thing, maybe she was having a bad morning. Friday morning, same time, same elevator. I'm heading down to grab breakfast before the final day of sessions. The elevator dings, doors open, and there she is again. Same woman, same attitude, already moving forward like a freight train. But this time I was ready. I declared that it wasn't happening today and matched her energy completely. While she was trying to push past me, I power walked straight out of that elevator. Since I'm only 5 feet 4 and she's taller, my shoulder hit her right in the chest area. She wasn't expecting any resistance, so she stumbled backward into the elevator. Her eyes went wide and her mouth dropped open like she couldn't believe someone had the audacity to stand up to her. Karen demanded to know what I thought I was doing, claiming I had assaulted her. I told her to excuse herself instead. I just smiled and kept walking toward the lobby. Behind me, I could hear her sputtering to her partner. She was ranting about what I had done and insisting that I had assaulted her. Her partner quietly pointed out that she had kinda walked into that situation. Karen then demanded to know whose side he was on. Finally, someone had called her out on her entitled behavior. I felt a little bad for her partner though. He seemed like a decent guy stuck with someone who clearly thought the world revolved around her. The rest of Friday went great. The conference wrapped up with a networking dinner, and I actually made some good connections for future business. I was feeling pretty good about the whole trip. Saturday morning was checkout time. I packed my bags and headed down to settle my bill. The lobby was busy with people leaving, typical weekend checkout rush. I was standing in line at the front desk when I spotted her across the room. She was arguing with the hotel staff about something, waving her hands around dramatically. Her partner was standing next to her looking like he wanted to disappear. When she turned around to make some point, she saw me. The glare she gave me could have melted steel. She was clearly still angry about the elevator incident from the day before. But instead of looking away or feeling intimidated, I just smiled and gave her a little wave. She looked like she was about to walk over and start something, but her partner grabbed her arm and steered her toward the exit. When they walked past me, she made sure to bump my shoulder with hers. She sarcastically told me to watch where I was standing. I cheerfully wished her a lovely day. That just made her even madder. She spun around like she was going to say something else, but her partner was already pulling her toward the door. Her partner reminded her that they were going to miss their flight if they didn't hurry. Karen angrily declared that this wasn't over between us. I pointed out that, actually, it kinda was, and that was the last I saw of her. I finished checking out, got my receipt, and headed home with a story that I knew would entertain my coworkers for weeks. I'm usually pretty conflict averse. I avoid confrontation whenever possible and try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But something about her entitled attitude just rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was the stress of the conference, or maybe I was just tired of people thinking they could walk all over others without results. Either way, I have no regrets. My little house has a nice front porch where I sometimes sit with my morning coffee, but I never expected it to become someone else's daycare center. It all started about 3 months ago when my next door neighbor moved in with her elderly mother. The neighbor seemed friendly enough at first, always waving when she saw me outside. Her mom looked to be in her 80s, walked with a cane, and seemed pretty frail. I felt bad for both of them, honestly, since taking care of an elderly parent can be easy. The first time it happened, I was working on a logo design when I heard voices outside. I looked through my window and saw my neighbor helping her mom sit down in one of my porch chairs. My neighbor told her mom to wait there and that she'd be back in 1 hour. The elderly woman asked whose porch it was, but my neighbor just brushed off her concern and said the person who lived there was really nice. I watched as my neighbor got in her car and drove off, leaving her confused-looking mother on my porch. I felt terrible for the old woman, so I went outside. I asked if she was okay. She told me she wasn't sure where she was and that her daughter had told her to wait there. I offered her some water and invited her inside where it was cooler. She said that was very kind of me. I ended up spending the next 1.5 hours chatting with her instead of working. She was actually really sweet, telling me stories about her late husband and how she used to be a teacher. When my neighbor came back, she acted like this was totally normal. My neighbor thanked me and called me a sweetheart. I told her that next time she should let me know beforehand. She agreed and said no problem. But there wasn't a next time conversation because she just kept doing it. 2 days later, I was on a video call with a client when I noticed the elderly mother sitting on my porch again. I had to mute myself and wave at her through the window so she wouldn't think I was ignoring her. My client kept asking if everything was okay because I looked distracted. This became a weekly thing, then twice a week, then almost daily. My neighbor would drop her mom off like my porch was some kind of adult daycare facility. Sometimes she'd be gone for 3 or 4 hours. I'd see the old woman just sitting there, sometimes looking confused, sometimes nodding off in the chair. The worst part was that I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I tried to work, I'd be looking out the window to make sure she was okay. What if she fell? What if she had a medical emergency? What if she got confused and wandered into the street? I'm not a caregiver, and I definitely didn't sign up for this responsibility. After about 1 month of this nonsense, I decided to say something. I waited until my neighbor was helping her mom out of the car. I asked if I could talk to her for a second. She said sure and asked what was up. I told her I needed her to stop leaving her mother on my porch because I worked from home and couldn't concentrate knowing she was out there. My neighbor said I didn't have to watch her mom because she just sat there and wasn't bothering anyone. I explained that wasn't the point and that I felt responsible if something happened to her. She insisted nothing would happen and that her mom was fine. I told her I understood she had errands to run, but this wasn't fair to me or her mother. I suggested she take her mom with her or find actual adult daycare. My neighbor said she thought I was a nice person and complained that her mom was just an old lady sitting on a porch. She said it wasn't like she was asking me to feed her or anything. The conversation went nowhere. She acted like I was being unreasonable for not wanting an elderly stranger left on my property without my consent. But she did stop for about 1 week and I thought maybe she'd gotten the message. Then it started up again. But now she was being sneaky about it. She'd drop her mom off when she thought I wasn't looking, or she'd park around the corner and walk her over. One morning I found the elderly woman on my porch at 7 a.m. She'd been sitting there in the cold for who knows how long. The elderly woman told me she wasn't sure why she was there, but her daughter had told her to wait. I asked how long she'd been sitting there. She said she didn't remember, but that it was quite chilly. That was it. I was done being the nice neighbor. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The officer who came out was really understanding. The officer asked if my neighbor had been abandoning her elderly mother on my property without permission. I confirmed that was basically what was happening and that I'd asked her to stop multiple times. The officer said that wasn't okay and asked where the daughter was. I told him she'd left about 1 hour ago and usually came back eventually. When my neighbor returned and saw the police car, her attitude changed real quick. The officer told her she couldn't leave her mother on someone else's property without their permission. My neighbor protested that she wasn't asking me to do anything and that her mom was just sitting there. The officer explained that it didn't matter because I had asked her multiple times to stop, and she'd continued. He said this could be considered abandonment of a vulnerable adult. My neighbor seemed shocked and said it was abandonment when her mom was just sitting on a porch. The officer asked how she would feel if someone kept leaving their elderly parent at her house without asking. The officer explained that what she was doing could actually result in charges, and that if it happened again, I should call immediately. My neighbor's face went white. My neighbor said she didn't realize it was such a big deal. The officer told her that now she did. After the officer left, my neighbor tried to convince me she just misunderstood the situation. She said she really thought I didn't mind since I was always so nice to her mom. I told her that being polite to her mom didn't mean I'd agreed to be her unpaid babysitter. She explained that she just needed someone trustworthy nearby while she ran errands. I suggested she hire an actual caregiver or take her mom with her. She finally stopped after that, but now she gives me dirty looks whenever she sees me outside. A few weeks later, I noticed a car from a home health agency visiting their house regularly. So apparently she did figure out how to get proper help for her mom. The elderly woman still waves at me sometimes when she's outside with her actual caregiver, and she seems much happier and more alert than she ever did sitting alone on my porch for hours. I don't feel guilty about calling the police. I was coming home from a 24-hour shift at the fire station. We'd responded to 3 calls that day, including a bad kitchen fire that took us 4 hours to put out completely. I was tired, my uniform was still smoky, and all I wanted was to fill up my truck and get home to my family. My wife had texted me earlier saying dinner would be ready when I got back, and my 2 kids were excited to show me their school projects. The gas station was busy for a Tuesday night. I pulled up to pump number 7 and started the usual routine. I put in my card, picked the fuel grade, and began filling up. My truck has a huge tank since I use it for work sometimes, so it usually takes a good 5 minutes to fill completely. I was standing there holding the nozzle when this woman in a fancy car pulled up behind me. At first, everything seemed normal. She parked and got out of her car to wait for the pump, but then she started pacing around, checking her watch every few seconds and making these loud sighing noises. I could feel her staring at me, but I just focused on my truck and tried to ignore her. The woman suddenly came over to me and asked if I was almost done. I told her politely that I just needed a couple more minutes since my tank was almost full. She complained loudly that she'd been waiting for ages and that some people had places to be. I looked at the pump display and realized I'd only been there for maybe 3 minutes total. My tank was about 3/4 full. I explained again that I understood she was in a hurry, but I'd be finished soon since the tank was almost full. She got more frustrated and asked what I was even doing that was taking so long. She walked over to where I was standing and got right in my face. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with what seemed like alcohol on her breath. The woman told me I needed to hurry up because she had a very important appointment to get to. I said that I was filling up as fast as the pump allowed and that she would need to wait her turn, like everyone else. That's when she completely lost it. She started yelling about how she shouldn't have to wait behind some dirty worker and bragged about driving a $70,000 car. She was pointing at my soot-stained uniform and getting more upset by the second. Other customers were starting to stare. I asked her to please step back and wait in her vehicle, promising I'd be done in just a minute. She refused and told me to move my piece of junk right away because she was taking the pump. She actually tried to grab the nozzle out of my hand. I held onto it and stepped between her and my truck. I told her she needed to calm down and wait her turn, making it clear I wasn't moving until my tank was full. That's when she did something I never expected. She walked back to my truck, yanked open the driver's door, and climbed inside. She announced that if I wouldn't move the truck, she would do it herself. This woman was actually trying to steal my truck while the gas nozzle was still attached. I shouted for her to get out of my truck right away, but she had already started the engine. I quickly stopped the fuel pump and tried to remove the nozzle, but she started driving forward slowly, dragging the hose with her. She yelled that she was taking the spot whether I liked it or not. The gas station attendant was shouting from inside, and other customers were pulling out their phones to record. I ran alongside my moving truck and managed to grab the door handle. I told her to stop the truck immediately, warning her that she was going to damage the pump. She ignored me and kept driving slowly forward. The hose was stretching to its limit. I knew that in a few more feet, either the hose would snap or the pump would be damaged. When you're a firefighter, you see too many gas station accidents to let this continue. I managed to get my upper body through the open window and grab the steering wheel. I told her to stop. She said I was assaulting her and tried to push me away while still pressing the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward another few inches. I had no choice. I reached across and punched her in the shoulder to get her attention and make her stop. She cried out in pain and threatened to call the police. I told her that was a good idea since she had just tried to steal my truck and damaged gas station property. She finally stopped the truck and turned off the engine. I kept her pinned in the driver's seat while I called my colleagues on the police force. When you're a firefighter for 8 years, you get to know a lot of cops. I told them who I was and requested units at the Shell station on Maple Street, explaining that I had someone detained for attempted vehicle theft and property damage. The woman seemed shocked to learn I was a firefighter and said that I couldn't arrest her. I explained that while I couldn't arrest her, I could detain her until the real police arrived, and they would be very interested in her little joyride. Within 5 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled into the gas station. Officer Rudy, who I'd worked with on several accident scenes, got out of the first car. The officer asked what we had going on. I explained that the woman had tried to steal my truck because she didn't want to wait for me to finish getting gas, and that she drove off with the nozzle still attached, which could have caused an explosion. The woman said that I was lying and that I had attacked her, demanding to press charges. Officer Rudy looked at the stretched gas hose, the crowd of witnesses with their phones out, and then back at the woman. He pointed out that multiple people had recorded her getting into someone else's vehicle and driving away, which was attempted vehicle theft. The woman tried to justify her actions by saying she was in a hurry and that I was taking too long. Officer Rudy said that being in a hurry wasn't how gas stations worked. They ended up arresting her for attempted vehicle theft, property damage to the gas station, and public intoxication. Turns out she'd been at happy hour before this and was definitely over the legal limit. The gas station manager thanked me for preventing more serious damage to their equipment. He said if she'd driven much further, the pump could have been ripped right out of the ground. When they put her in the back of the patrol car, she was still yelling about how unfair it all was and threatening to sue everyone for discrimination. I finally got home 2 hours later than planned, but thankfully, my wife had kept dinner warm. Back in 2019, I was working at a Radio Shack in Toronto. It was one of the last locations still operating in Canada before they finally shut down for good. I've been there for about 2 years, mostly dealing with everyday electronic sales and the occasional tech support question. The store was pretty quiet most days. We got the usual crowd of older folks looking for batteries, hobbyists hunting for random cables, and the occasional person who still thought Radio Shack was the place to go for electronics advice. Most customers were decent enough, but every now and then you get someone who made you question humanity. It was a Tuesday afternoon when this middle-aged guy walked in with a box tucked under his arm. He looked irritated before he even reached the counter, which was never a good sign. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis. His wife followed behind him, keeping her distance. The guy slammed the box down on my counter without any greeting and demanded the return. I asked him what the reason was, and he told me in a gruff, dismissive tone that they had decided they didn't want it anymore. He said it like I was wasting his time by asking. I could see it was a computer speaker system, one of those 2.1 setups with two small speakers and a subwoofer. Pretty standard stuff we sold all the time. I told him that was fine and that I just needed to inspect the product to make sure everything was in order for the refund. I opened the box and started looking through the contents. The speakers looked fine, the subwoofer seemed intact, but when I got to the main cable that connects to your computer, something was very wrong. The headphone jack at the end had been completely cut off, and the wire was stripped bare with the copper showing. I pointed out that the headphone jack had been removed from the cable and asked what happened. He let out this dramatic sigh and rolled his eyes like I was the stupidest person he'd ever encountered. He told me that, obviously, he had cut it off to feed it through the wall into his amp because he needed to connect it to his stereo system. I was trying to process what he'd just told me when he kept talking, not letting me get a word in. He explained that when he turned on his amp, the speakers blew and he smelled burning plastic, so the speakers were obviously defective. That's why he was returning them, he said. I just stared at him for a moment. This guy had taken a powered, amplified computer speaker system and plugged it directly into another powered amplifier. It was like plugging a power strip into itself and wondering why the lights went out. I asked him to clarify if I understood correctly that he had cut off the headphone jack from these powered speakers and connected them directly to his stereo amplifier. He confirmed that, yes, obviously he had done that and they were defective because they broke. His wife made this snorting sound like she was trying not to laugh. He immediately spun around and started yelling at her in German. I caught most of what he was saying because I've been gaming online with some German friends for years and have picked up quite a bit of the language. He was telling her to shut up and stop embarrassing him, calling her stupid for laughing. Then he gestured toward me and said I was an a-hole who didn't know what I was talking about. The word Arschloch is pretty hard to miss when you know what to listen for. I decided I'd had enough of this guy's attitude. I told him that sorry, I only understood a little German, so he would have to repeat what he said before he called me an a-hole because I didn't quite catch it. His face went completely white then bright red. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, making these weird gasping sounds. His wife covered her face with her hands, and I could see her shoulders shaking before he could recover enough to say anything. I gently pushed the box back across the counter toward him. I explained that I was sorry, but I couldn't process a return for items that had been modified or damaged through user error. These speakers worked exactly when designed until he connected them improperly to equipment they weren't meant to work with. He protested that they were defective, but I told him no, they weren't. I explained that what happened was that he sent an amplified signal from his stereo into speakers that already had their own built-in amplifier. That was like pressing the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. It was going to cause problems. The burning smell he mentioned was likely the internal components being overloaded because they were receiving far more power than they were designed to handle. He just stood there staring at me, his mouth hanging open. His wife tugged on his arm and whispered something in German that sounded like she was telling him they should just leave. I continued explaining that the headphone jack he had removed was specifically designed to receive a low-power signal from his computer's sound card, not a high-power signal from an amplifier output. I offered to recommend some passive speakers that would work better with his setup if he was interested, but he wasn't interested in listening to reason. He grabbed the box, mumbled something under his breath, and walked toward the door. His wife followed, quietly apologizing in English when she passed my counter, telling me she was sorry about that and that she had told him it wouldn't work. After they left, I walked over to the trash can behind the counter and held it open, just in case they decided to leave the box by the door. Sure enough, about 30 seconds later, I heard the little bell above our entrance chime again, and when I looked up, the box was sitting right by the door. I was nice enough to throw the speakers away for him. After all, customer service was part of the job. Where I work, most of us guys just got regular trims every few weeks, and the few women in our department either kept their hair short or tied it back properly. It was never really an issue. The previous manager was great. He understood that When we followed basic safety protocols and got the job done, he didn't need to micromanage every little detail. I had shoulder-length hair that I always kept tied back in a ponytail during work hours, wore the proper safety gear, and never had a single incident in 8 years. The CEO even complimented my work ethic a few times, and we'd chat regularly about process improvements and company goals. Then last month, everything changed. Our old manager got promoted to regional supervisor, and they brought in this new guy from another branch. From day one, you could tell he was one of those managers who needed to make his mark immediately. He started implementing new policies left and right, most of them completely unnecessary. The first week he called me into his office. I was expecting maybe a get-to-know-you chat or discussion about my role, but instead I got this lecture about professional appearance standards. He told me we needed to talk about my hair situation. When I asked if there was a problem with my work, he brushed that off and said it wasn't about my work performance. Instead, he went on about maintaining proper safety standards and professional appearance, claiming that company policy required short hair in our department. I reminded him that I've been following safety protocols for 8 years and always kept my hair secured during work hours, but he wasn't having any of it. He said that wasn't good enough anymore and demanded that I get it cut short. He made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. I was pretty annoyed, but I figured I'd check with the CEO since we had a good working relationship. When I brought it up during one of our regular coffee chats, his response surprised me. He said that while it might seem silly, if the new manager wanted to enforce the hair policy more strictly, he wasn't going to override him on something like this. He reminded me that I've been with the company long enough to know they valued team players. When I pressed him about whether I really had to cut my hair, he said it wouldn't hurt to show some flexibility and dismissed it as just hair. That stung a bit. After 8 years of excellent performance reviews and building a solid relationship with leadership, I was being asked to change my appearance to appease some new manager's power trip. But here's the thing about malicious compliance. Sometimes the best way to handle unreasonable demands is to follow them exactly when requested. The next day, I walked into the manager's office and told him that he was right about company policy requiring short hair. He seemed pleased that I was being reasonable about it. I asked him just to be clear how short we were talking. He said short enough that it couldn't be a safety hazard and told me to use my judgment. I agreed and said I'd take care of it that day. I left work early and went straight to my barber. When I sat down in the chair, he asked what I wanted. I told him I needed it all off, completely bald. He seemed surprised and asked if I was sure about such a drastic change. I explained it was company policy and they wanted short hair for safety reasons. He shrugged and fired up the clippers. 20 minutes later, I was completely bald. Not just buzzed short, I'm talking about smooth, shiny, cue ball bald. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had happened. The receptionist did a double take but didn't say anything. I grabbed my coffee and headed to the manager's office for our morning briefing. When I knocked and walked in, the manager looked up from his computer and his jaw literally dropped. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth and he just stared at me for a solid 10 seconds. He stammered and asked what I had done to myself. I explained that he had said to cut my hair short for safety reasons, and you couldn't get much safer than this. He protested that he didn't mean it should be this excessive. I asked if there was still a safety concern with my current hairstyle. When he admitted there wasn't, I said I thought we were good, and asked if there was anything else he needed to discuss. He dismissed me with a wave, still looking shocked. The reaction from my co-workers was immediate and hilarious. People would start conversations with me, then stop mid-sentence when they really looked at me. A few asked if I was going through some kind of personal crisis. Others just avoided eye contact altogether. But the real comedy started when the CEO saw me. We ran into each other in the hallway later that morning. He was shocked and asked what had happened to my head. I explained that the new manager had asked me to cut my hair short for safety compliance and that I was just following company policy. He asked incredulously if the manager had told me to go bald. I told him the manager had asked me to cut it short and I had used my judgment when instructed. The CEO walked away shaking his head, and that was the last normal conversation we had. Suddenly, our regular coffee chats stopped happening. I wasn't getting invited to the monthly strategy meetings anymore. Even the daily team briefings somehow started happening without me. Apparently, they were optional now. My co-workers started treating me like I had some contagious disease. Conversations would stop when I entered the break room. People found excuses to work on different projects. It was like my bald head had turned me into some kind of workplace pariah. The manager, meanwhile, was clearly regretting his power play. Every time he saw me, he'd get this uncomfortable look on his face. During team meetings, he'd avoid making direct eye contact. You could practically see him thinking about how this whole situation had backfired. 3 weeks into my new bold look, we had a company safety inspection. The inspector was going through our department, checking protocols and asking questions. When he got to me, something interesting happened. The inspector commented that he noticed we maintained very strict hair safety standards in our department. The manager nervously replied that they took safety very seriously. The inspector then said my approach was exemplary, calling it a complete elimination of any potential hair hazard and very thorough. He couldn't exactly argue with the safety inspector's approval. Later that afternoon, one of the other guys in my department came up to me privately. He told me the new manager had just asked him to trim his hair and wanted to know what he should do. I reminded him that company policy required short hair for safety and he should probably follow the rules. When he asked how short we were talking, I suggested he use his judgment. The next day, 3 more guys showed up with buzz cuts. Not quite extreme like my bold look, but definitely shorter than the manager had intended. By the end of the week, half the department looked like they'd joined the military. The manager started backpedaling fast. He called a team meeting and said he thought there might have been some miscommunication about the hair policy, explaining that it didn't need to be quite so extreme. But it was too late. Word had spread through the company about the new strict safety standards in our department. Other departments started joking about whether they'd be next. The CEO was getting questions from other managers about whether this was a company-wide policy change. A month later, I'm still completely bold and loving every minute of it. The manager hasn't mentioned hair policy to anyone since. In fact, when new employees start, he makes a point of telling them that current hair lengths are perfectly acceptable when they follow basic safety protocols. The CEO still avoids me, which honestly makes my job easier since I don't have to sit through those long strategy meetings anymore. My coworkers have mostly gotten used to my new look, though some still do double takes. And being bald is actually pretty convenient. No more bad hair days, no more expensive haircuts, and I save time getting ready in the morning. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.